2 by 3 meters. 9 by 6 feet. That was her world. Samantha buried her face in her hands and sobbed silently while she sat on the too small cot, and the soles of her feet slowly moved back and forth on the rough cement floor. It was a prison, a cell, and yet she had no idea when she had come here, how or why. A groan followed her sobs. Had she been here for years? Maybe even decades? Or just a few days? There was a toilet in the corner, a window up the wall, and a small sink. The thin blanket she had slung over her shoulder didn't help with the cold much, but the grey outfit she was wearing beneath was even worse. This place was hell, she thought. But why was she here? Sam pushed a blanket off her shoulders, forced herself to straighten, and then stood up. She moved slowly along the wall. 2 steps and she reached the toilet. Samantha turned her body and followed the outline of her cell. 1 more step and she reached the sink. Then 2 and she arrived at the bars of the door. It was impossible to know how often she had taken these exact steps. Her fingers shot out and brushed the bars as she moved along them, then turned once more and took another step, only to arrive back at the cot. This was her world. It had shrunk down to a cell so small the thought alone was driving her insane. Yeah, that was the correct word choice. She was losing her mind. Maybe she had lost it already. Samantha thought about sitting down again, burying her face in her hands and weeping, but something inside her stopped her. If she did that, she would stay like that for a long, long time. Instead, she turned toward the window, slowly walked over and jumped up. Her fingers found the ledge, grabbed hold and pulled her up until she could see out of it. The view had changed again, Samantha thought with a grim smile. Right now, out there, she could see an endless desert. Wind was blowing over the sand, shifting the dunes, while a bright moon was shining above. There was no sign of life there, neither people nor animals walking around. It was dead, she thought, just like all the other scenes she had seen out there. Sometimes she could see a foggy forest, other times snow-covered mountains, and once she had caught glimpses of what looked like a lake of pure fire. The place she could see always changed, but a few things still remained the same. She had never seen a single living being out there. It was always night, and no matter how bad the weather out there was, not even a breeze would ever reach her cell. She felt her fingertips hurting, moved her head forward, and gazed at a dead and empty desert for one last time, before she finally let go and fell down back onto the floor. Samantha shivered, then turned around and looked at the cell door, keeping her in here. She had tried rattling them, had tried screaming at the top of her lungs until she got hoarse, and had even tried stretching out her arm to make someone notice her. Nothing had changed. No one had answered her cries or come to take a look. It was as if whoever had put her in this place had forgotten her. She let her back touch the cold wall, then sank down until she was sitting on the floor. Why? How? Those thoughts still swirled around her mind. Samantha closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again and exhaled. Who had put her here? She had no idea. And now, thinking about it, she couldn't even remember when or where she had been before coming to this place. straining her mind while trying to recall anything about a time before this cell. She could feel a migraine coming on. Her name was Samantha, but that strangely felt like it was all there was to her. How old was she? Where had she been born or grown up? A cold chill ran through her at the thought. She felt like she should be able to answer those questions, but nothing came to mind. The more she thought about it, the worse it seemed to get. Flashes of bright light appeared in front of her eyes as the migraine started, and a pain like getting her head split by an axe surged through her. Samantha groaned and screamed as she held her head and keeled over. Her elbow hit the rough ground hard, but it didn't register. All she could think about, concentrate on, were those flashes of light, like tiny parts of memories shooting through her mind. Where was she from? She felt like she could remember the feeling of the sun on her skin. Laughter, trees. Samantha screamed again as her whole body began to shake and tremble. Blood flowed over her tongue and from her nose. She could hear a car, the noise of the engine, and then saw a bright light. With a groan, her body suddenly relaxed and the visions disappeared as she rolled over onto her back and stared up at the single naked light bulb hanging from the cell's ceiling. This was her son now, it seemed to say. Samantha couldn't help but cry. A tear ran down her face and dropped onto the floor next to her head. She couldn't take it anymore. This was torture. No way to escape, no one to talk to. Her mind was breaking, and something inside of her seemed to work against her whenever she tried to remember. Maybe she should lie down on the cot and try to sleep. It wasn't like she would miss anything, right? The light was on all the time. No one ever passed by her cell, and not a single person would come and talk to her if she stayed awake. But something inside her bristled at the thought of going to sleep for a simple reason. The nightmares. Samantha couldn't remember them after waking up, but every time she fell asleep, she awoke with a scream and found herself drenched in sweat. Maybe that was the real hell. Slowly, she turned herself to the side so she wouldn't have to stare at the lamp any longer, then rolled on her belly and got up. If only the window were lower on the wall, then she could stand there and watch the outside. It would be an improvement, Samantha thought, and started to walk toward the bars of the door. There wasn't anything else to do in here besides walking around now. She reached them, put her forehead against the cold metal, and looked at the wall on the other side. It had the exact same shade of grey as the ones in her cell, the floor, and even the ceiling. Were there other cells to her left and right? Other people? She doubted it. No one had ever answered her screams, and she hadn't heard anyone else crying either. If there were, they had to be deaf, mute, and motionless. Samantha shook her head and felt her skin bumping against the metal. If only someone would come to her and tell her why she was here. This whole situation would be easier to stomach. But there wasn't, and there wouldn't ever be. She knew it deep inside. It was a punishment for her, a way to break her apart mentally and physically. Samantha stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the grey wall on the opposite side, listening to her own rhythmic heartbeat. It was maddening, but she forced herself to stay there anyway. Turning around would be giving up. If she just kept staring, she might notice something. Samantha let out a hollow, sad laugh, fitting for her grey, unchanging surroundings. Was she already losing her mind? The thought appeared suddenly in her head, and she had to step back to stop herself from giving off another sound. Carefully, she touched her own face and felt heat coming off her cheeks. Was she running a fever? It wouldn't surprise her if she was honest. Cracks were already appearing in her mind. She could feel it clearly in moments like this. Something was wrong about this place and her. Samantha ruffled her hair and felt a strand coming loose. Shit. She needed to stop herself. A twitch was running through her eye. This was pointless. Standing here, staring out. It wouldn't change anything, she told herself, but still felt this part of her resisting any kind of logic. She had to do something, it seemed to say, but Samantha shook her head almost violently, then forced herself to whirl around, take a deep breath, and walk over to the cot. If she were running a fever, she needed to get some rest. Her heart was starting to beat quicker. As long as she didn't fall asleep, it would be okay. She tried to calm herself, but her body was already shivering in anticipation. She was fearing it, the nightmares, even if she couldn't remember. Samantha lay down on the uncomfortable cot, grabbed a thin blanket and draped it over herself. From this position, she was staring right at the metal sink hanging from the wall. Had she ever tried to turn it on? She wasn't sure anymore. At least she couldn't remember it. What about the toilet? She hadn't used it, right? Those thoughts made her head ache again. It felt like the pressure was building inside her skull. Samantha closed her eyes and took a deep breath to clear her mind. Concentrating on herself should help. She could feel the hard cot beneath her and the scratchy blanket touching her skin. The grey prisoner's uniform was ill-fitting and uncomfortable, while the air entering her nose was cold and stale. Samantha steadied her breathing to get her heart rate under control. It didn't help much. She could feel herself getting lulled in by the steady rhythm, though. The darkness behind her closed eyelids felt endless, like she was finally escaping this dreadful grey place and beginning to float. Samantha felt herself swallowing, then suddenly shot up with a terrified scream coming out of her lungs. Her arms and legs were trembling, sweat was sticking to her skin. Her heart was racing out of control, and while she was taking deep breaths, it felt like no air was reaching her lungs. He is here. The words flashed through her mind, and she jumped from the cot, stumbled, and crashed to the floor. Her head was spinning, but her instinct still screamed at her to get away as quickly as she could. She scooted back, away from the bed and toward the door, then raised her head and almost screamed again. There, in the corner, someone was standing. What should have been a welcome change instead filled her with dread. She could see the boy in the corner, his hands down at his side while he was looking at her with this empty gaze. Every single part of her mind howled in unison that he was here to hurt her. Sam's back hit the bars with a thud, but the boy didn't react at all. He was still staring at her with blood seeping from the top of his head and down his face. Samantha screamed in the faint hope that someone might hear her. There had to be other people here now. That maybe 15-year-old kid hadn't simply appeared on his own. She turned her head to the side and looked down the empty grey hallway. No one was coming. No one was answering her shout. She could feel the cold metal in her back, then immediately forced herself to look forward once more and toward the teenager. He hadn't moved, but some part of her warned her that he might soon. His gaze was still unfocused, but pointed at her. Sam felt her heart racing out of control. Seeing him there did something to her. Tears were running down her face, and she screamed again. The teenager's head suddenly jerked up, and at that moment, the lights all around went out, plunging her into absolute darkness. Sam grabbed hold of the bars behind her and pressed herself closer to them. She could hear it, her own breathing, and in between, the sound of someone slowly walking over the cold floor. The smell of blood was getting stronger. She tried to put a hand in front of her mouth to muffle the noise of her breath, but it didn't help at all. With the beating of her heart so loud and the sound of air whistling past her teeth, there was no way the teenager wouldn't know where she was. He was coming closer. She could feel it, hear it, and even smell it. A metallic odor was coming from him, permeating the air. Another step. Sam could feel herself hyperventilating. She tried closing her mouth, but the instant she did so, she felt like she was suffocating. Around her, the darkness stayed the same, but she knew that inside of it, the one who had appeared in her cell was coming toward her. She couldn't run, couldn't fight, so what should she do? Scream for help again? No one would be coming. The sound of someone walking stopped right in front of her, and Sam felt like she could feel a sickening heat touching her skin. He was so close. If she stretched out her hand, she could grab him. No, that wasn't right. All she would need to do to touch him was shift her head forward. She could feel his heat, his breath. He was right in front of her, close enough to smell the sour stench his body was giving off. Samantha closed her eyes tightly. Even if it was dark, she didn't want to have them open. She couldn't bear to look at him. In her mind, she prayed that he would make it quick, whatever he had come here to do. The light came alive again, but Samantha kept her eyes shut. He was still there. She could see his shadow even through her closed eyelids and felt his presence right in front of her nose. Why had he come here? Who was he? Suddenly, she thought she could remember something about him. Hadn't she seen him before? Sam felt a sudden jolt and opened her eyes. The light above her was shining as dimly as ever, but now she found herself alone in her cell again. Her heart was still racing, and she felt like she might suffocate any second now. Had he been real at all? She let out her breath, then pulled herself up by the bars. Her legs moved like they were made out of rubber, and Sam feared falling down if she let go. Even though he wasn't there anymore, her body behaved as if he was. She still felt that terror and could smell his sour breath. Her cell was empty, she told herself. Maybe she had just dreamed the whole thing? No, she would have had to sleep by the bars for that to make any sense. Her legs were still wobbly, and Samantha had trouble getting enough air into her lungs. She lowered her head, then almost let out a shriek. There, right in front of her feet, she could see 2 wet shoe prints, just a hand's breadth away from her. Her legs started to shake even worse. She slumped over, held onto the bars to keep herself from hitting the floor completely, then fell to her knees. There was something around the shoe prints. Droplets of blood and glimmering shards of glass. Samantha felt sick as she saw them. Her head started droning. It was something she should remember, she felt deep inside. Something she had forgotten, even though she shouldn't have. A blinding flash of light shot through her vision as she turned and crawled away, around the drops of blood and toward the cot. Her head was hurting so much, as was her chest. With her heart still racing out of control and the air not getting into her lungs, she felt like she might actually die. Would that really be so bad? Maybe this whole thing would finally end. She could close her eyes and stop this torture. The right side of her body went numb as she fell over and hit her head on the wall. Samantha felt too exhausted to continue moving. Everything hurt. Her whole body seemed to be working against her. How could she even try to go on? What was there for her at the end of the tunnel? Would the door swing open and she could leave? Or would this teenager return, but next time he would grab her and kill her? Samantha felt another shiver running through her whole body. She was now lying on her side, fighting for air. It was so cold, and yet at the same time almost sweltering. What had she done to deserve this? Samantha pressed her back against a cold grey wall and tried to somehow get her body back under control. No, giving up was impossible. She didn't know who had brought her here or for what purpose, but she couldn't let them play with her like that. There was only one thing she needed to focus on: to get out of this cell, this place. Samantha forced herself to exhale slowly, then inhale calmly. Her heart was still racing, but she finally felt like she was getting air again. She let her eyes drift over to the door of the cell, then bit her inner cheek. There had to be something she could do, right? If no one was watching or coming for her, they wouldn't notice her trying to break out. Samantha stretched out her right arm, then opened and closed her fist. There was still a slight tingling sensation in her fingers, but they felt far less numb than before. Yes, she would escape here, she promised herself. Getting up with the help of the cot, Samantha looked around the cell once more and tried to find anything that could aid in her escape. She would have to get through the cell door, not the barred window. That much was clear to her. The only problem was how. Sadly, beside the blanket, there was nothing in here that looked even movable. No other objects or things. Samantha walked over to the door, grabbed hold of the bars, and for once tried to shake them. Even at the first moment, she realized they couldn't be moved. But she tried for another minute before letting go again. Curses flew out of her into the empty cell. She bent down and looked at the lock for once. It was a sliding door, pure metal like the ones in old prisons. There was no handle or any purchase to break it open with, and no lock was visible. Well, that wouldn't have mattered anyway. It was not like she could pick a lock, and in this situation she didn't even have tools. Sam let her fist hit the bars, but all she got out of that was a bruise and a loud thud. No, she needed something heavy, or at least hard to bust this thing open. Turning her head, her eyes fell upon a cot she had been sleeping on. It was bolted to the floor. That wouldn't work. Next, the toilet. No chance there either. It looked far too flimsy, and she really didn't want to flood her cell with sewage if she could avoid it. So, with a sigh, she started walking toward the sink. It was one of those metal ones, bolted to the wall as well, but here she thought she might have a chance. Samantha touched the tap and opened it. There was no water coming out of it anyway. She couldn't care about that right now. Instead, she stepped back, found an angle, and then kicked its side with all the force she could muster. The loud thud echoed around her small cell, and she could feel it vibrating in response. Sam let out a sigh. This would work, she told herself, then gave it another kick. Every time she did, the loud thud would fill her whole cell, and the fixture would shake and vibrate. It was only a matter of time, Sam told herself. She stepped back again and kicked it once more. In her ears, the thud started to sound like a heartbeat. Why hadn't she done this sooner? If not to escape, then at least to release some of the pent-up stress. The small cell suddenly felt far less depressing now that she had a goal in mind. She pulled back, kicked, and listened to the sound. It repeated over and over again, building a slow rhythm, while her steps formed a fitting dance. Samantha lost herself in it. Her feet started to hurt, but she didn't care or slow down. This was what she had to do, she told herself. The sound of the sink vibrating slowly got louder and longer. She noticed a change, but didn't let it bother her. Right now, she felt like she was finally in control of something again. This would work. The thud echoed in her ears, and for the first time in a long time, her heartbeat stayed steady. She would get out of here. Samantha's foot hit the side of the sink, and suddenly a new noise appeared in the echo of the hit. A screeching sound, as if metal strained against concrete. She stopped for a moment, took a breath, and then kicked again. There was a definite reverb, and she could feel the sink moving to the side. Samantha felt elated. She had thought it would take her days, but no, this thing was breaking already. Again she kicked, now speeding up her steps. Somewhere inside the grey wall, something groaned. Another kick. The faucet wobbled. One more. She could see dust raining down onto the floor of the cell. Some part of her wondered if anyone would come running at the noise. If there were people here guarding this place, they had to realize what she was up to. Right? She kicked again, and the whole fixture rattled as its edge suddenly broke free. Samantha felt elated as she watched the thing hanging from the wall. There was hope here in this place. For the first time, she felt. One more kick. This one with all her might hit the metal fixture and made it rattle, then bend, then fall down. A cloud of dust rose in her cell, but Samantha didn't care at all about it. She rushed forward, gripped the edge of the fallen fixture, and looked for anything she might be able to pry into the door. Her fingers touched the metal, and suddenly she froze. The hair on the nape of her neck stood up in an instant, and she felt the same cold chill she had experienced when she had woken up. Samantha turned her head to look at the wall where the fixture had been, and stifled a shriek. She could see a dark hole there, big enough for her head to pass through. Her whole body seemed to shake as she stared into it, as the feeling of being watched got strong enough to completely fill her mind. Someone was in there, she screamed in her head, and as if to prove her right, fingers appeared at the edge of the hole, gripping the rough and broken concrete. Samantha jumped back and almost immediately felt the cold grey wall on the opposite side blocking her retreat. How? Why? She watched as the person in there pulled itself forward, slowly appearing from the hole she had created. Even now, before the head could reach the light, she already knew who had come here. It was the teenager again. She felt it deep inside, and the knowledge made her knees almost buckle. He was pulling himself out of the hole. Samantha already knew what would happen once he reached her. This time, he would attack her. She turned and ran for the cell door, gripped it with both her hands, and tried to rattle the bars. They didn't move. "Let me out!" she howled, looked back, and could see the hair of the head already appearing in the light. He was in here with her, coming to kill her. A clicking sound suddenly reached her ears, and for a single moment she thought she had lost her mind. Samantha felt the bars she was holding sliding back before she stumbled out of the cell. The door had opened. She could hardly believe it, but knew she had no time to think about it too deeply. The teenager was already pressing his shoulders through the hole. He would be here in a matter of seconds. Samantha turned and started to run. The corridor up ahead looked endless. There were cells on her side every few feet, but she couldn't spare them much thought. She needed to get away first. Somehow escape from here, because she knew that the teenager wouldn't simply stay in her cell. Her feet carried her forward, while up ahead one naked light bulb followed the next, all of them hanging close, just far enough away from each other to cover the whole corridor. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see people in the cells. They were sitting on their cots, standing in the corners or holding onto the bars while crying. Not a single sound made it out of their cells. These were their own personal hells. She shook her head to clear her mind as she continued sprinting down the corridor. Still, no end in sight. Dozens of prison cells had passed her by already. What if her attacker ran after her? What should she do? She couldn't run like this forever. Sooner or later, she would have to stop, and Samantha knew that that would be the moment he would catch up to her. Somehow, she needed to get out of here before that could happen. Her feet carried her forward over the unchanging grey concrete floor. Wouldn't there have to be an exit? How had she come here otherwise? She ran and ran without a change in sight. How far had she come? Samantha couldn't tell. All she knew was that her feet were hurting. She felt exhausted and scared, and soon her legs would stop. He was somewhere behind her, coming after her. She wanted to cry out for help, but some part of her stopped her from giving off another shout. It would only draw attention, it told her. Samantha sobbed and suddenly felt her feet tangling up. She lost her balance with a scream, fell, crashed to the floor, and rolled over once. Her knees and elbows were hurting, her heart was racing, and her lungs were filled with fire. Trying to get up again, she felt her arms buckling, then looked back the way she had come. He was standing there, just a dozen or so cells behind her, looking at her with this empty gaze. Samantha forced herself up, staggered, and then crashed into a grey door she hadn't seen on the opposite wall of the cells. What was going on here? She didn't have time to give it any thought. It opened for her immediately, and she found herself in a stairwell, leading up. Samantha shook her head in disbelief, but started running up the steps anyway. He would come after her and continue to follow her no matter where she disappeared to. Her legs were burning as she jumped up the steps. One landing was behind her, then the second. She heard the door at the bottom opening. Samantha cursed in her mind and looked up. This time, at least she wasn't staring at an endless stairwell. No, just 2 more landings, and she would reach the end. She groaned and forced herself to go on, running and jumping up the stairs. Every step was painful, every move made her wince. He was close already. She could feel it. Wherever she ran, she wouldn't escape him. Samantha cried out as she reached the last landing and jumped up the last set of stairs while holding onto the railing. He was coming up behind her. She groaned, forced herself to ignore the pain, shot forward, reached the last door, and pushed it open with her shoulder. Samantha wasn't sure what she had expected to see behind it, but where she found herself now made no sense to her. Instead of the building stretching out into infinity, she was stumbling across a wide roof, painted dark, with a white cross and a red H in the center. A landing spot for helicopters. No. Samantha turned toward the door and staggered backwards, away from it. Footsteps could be heard. He was coming. She looked out and around. It was the empty desert again, while the moon was shining brightly above. There was no place to hide here, nowhere to run anymore. She was caught. The door opened, and she watched in horror as the teenager stepped out into the moonlight. Blood was trickling from a wound on his head. Samantha looked at him, and her heart almost burst. She remembered something, seeing him before. Not in this place, but somewhere else. On a road, at night. She remembered the sound of her car driving, exhausted and angry. Her feet took another step back, and she felt the breeze coming from behind. The desert was so far below that she could hardly see the ground. He was coming toward her, slowly, steadily. Her eyes were numb. She remembered fumbling around with her phone in the car, then looking up and screaming. He had been standing there, next to the road, looking at her with a smile that turned into shock as he noticed her vehicle drifting toward him. Samantha could feel tears running down her cheeks as she now looked at the kid coming toward her. She had only seen him at that last second, the one before the impact, as her headlights had reflected in his eyes. The sound of the thud reverberated in her mind as the body hit her windshield and broke through. Shocked, she had ripped at the steering wheel and her vehicle had crashed into a tree. She remembered now. Everything. Her airbag hadn't worked and the crash had almost killed her. She had looked up at the broken body still lying on the hood of her car, the bleeding head, the shards of glass all over her dashboard. The same as in her cell. Then, darkness. Samantha shook her head. He was so close already, reaching out to her. She was sorry. Yes, for everything. But it had been an accident. Samantha stepped back from him again and felt the edge of the roof at her heel. He was staring at her with this empty gaze, and she knew what he wanted. Stay here and suffer her punishment. Samantha shook her head as she watched a hand stretch out toward her. If he touched her, she would find herself back in her cell, she knew. That was the one thing she couldn't bear. With a last, "I'm sorry," she gave him a soft smile, then took a step back and felt the wind rushing past as she plunged from the roof. Machines were beeping around her as she opened her eyes. Her whole body felt numb. But this time, she found herself on a comfy bed, surrounded by white walls and tubes running in and out of her. A hospital. Samantha cried a tear of joy. Had she been in a coma? Maybe. She felt groggy and moving hurt, but at least she wasn't back in the cell. The beeping of the machine changed, and she heard footsteps coming closer. They were light and quick. Nurses. Samantha tried to smile, but her expression froze. She could hear the heart rate monitor next to her bed starting to beep hectically. There was a shadow in the corner of her hospital room, one that definitely shouldn't be there. She felt his eyes on her the moment she noticed it. Samantha's scream turned into a groan that hardly left her mouth. The door flew open as two nurses rushed into the room. But all she could concentrate on right now were the dead eyes of the ghost, still staring at her.